And it's Jerry Ashton once again with 15 Minutes of Fact here on WGRNradio.com, the We Earth Global Radio Network, in pursuit of conscious living on a connected planet. I thank them so much for making this program possible, and I know you as a listener thank them very much because you get to hear people, such as the guest that we're having on next, that will tell you something important, something that needs to be heard. As you know, this program is dedicated to things that deal with the Occupy Wall Street movement, both pro, con, questioning, concerns, and above all else, seeking to find out the truth. You're not going to find it on mainstream radio or broadcast television. You already know that. It's certainly not going to be found on Fox News. In fact, if anything, we're an antidote for that sort of thing. 15 Minutes of Fact is as close to being that as possible, keeping the conversation down to a minimum amount of time with a maximum amount of information from people who are actually involved, not only as being part of the news, but in this case, by being the news. And we're talking about retired Philadelphia Police Captain Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis was featured in one previous interview by me almost 1 month and 2 days ago, May 23rd, 2012. Today is June 25. And when I discovered Ray, he was at an Occupy Wall Street movement. I'd seen him in the news as being someone who was being excoriated by the authorities for having the audacity to wear his uniform, which, by the way, is a right of his, to a demonstration. And the very fact that he was on the side of the protesters made it even worse. Well, that was a great interview, and in the 30 days since, there's been a lot of ground covered by Ray Lewis, and we want to talk with him today as to exactly what has the publicity done for him, what has it done for the general population, for the Occupy movement, and of course for the police department themselves. So Ray, I get so excited just talking to you. Welcome to the show today.
Jerry, I'm glad to be here. It's always a pleasure.
Well, it certainly is our pleasure. You know, what makes you so unusual, even to your fellow officers, was the fact that you came out of the police force as someone who devoted his time and energies to the patrolman, to that part of the police job. Now, what makes being a patrolman, that role, so important, and the fact that when you're talking about things that deal with Occupy and things that happen on the street, what relevance does that have for us to know about?
Patrol is where the officer has the daily interaction with the public, Jerry. That's where the tire meets the road. That's where all the action is. That's where the arrests are made. And that's where all kind of interactions happen in the patrol division. And I was a patrolman for 10 years. I made sergeant. I stayed as a patrol sergeant. Lieutenant, I was in charge of a patrol unit. And as captain, I was in charge of a district, which is all captain in charge of a district is considered in patrol.
Well, there's opportunities for both good things to happen and bad things to happen. And as we know from the Occupy Wall Street events and things long before and will probably go on long after, that there are a lot of terrible things that happen in the interaction between a policeman on the street and people who are in some fashion setting themselves up for an arrest. So when you talk to people about your role in Occupy Wall Street, and you as one stood in demonstration and was arrested by the New York City Police Department and handcuffed by them, what thoughts could that possibly have brought to your mind?
Well, the thought was I should be arrested. I was committing civil disobedience. I did sit in the street, and I refused an order to leave. So the arrest was legal, and the way they handled me and all the others I witnessed that day, it was done in a professional manner.
Now that's something worth applauding. I will bring up this very timely and sensitive subject of an instance just this past weekend where that didn't happen. There on YouTube is a video called Seattle Police Department Attacks Gay Street Party on Gay Pride Weekend. And in that YouTube show, there is an officer who is quite obviously walking up to a protester. I couldn't call him a protester, they were a partier, pepper spraying that person, and then grabbing them and pulling them into the street to be arrested. Now, the claim was that this 24-year-old male had actually pushed forward and kicked this commander in the knee, and he was arrested for assault. And yet it was obvious to anybody with eyes to see that that was not the case. How do you, as someone who cares for the highest standards of police activities in the police department, and someone who acknowledges that what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think the officer somewhat indicted himself when he said he was kicked in the leg by the alleged offender. And if the video doesn't show that, then it's an outright lie. The thing I will say is, on these video clips, it's very important to try to catch the 10, 15, 20 seconds prior to the officer's actions, because you don't know what the alleged offender did. But in this case, the officer states that he was kicked. The video shows that he wasn't. And even if he was kicked, you do not use the level of force of pepper spray. That's a level used when you have a totally uncontrolled assailant, and that's the only way you can subdue that person. Technically, legally, he should have instructed the individual to turn around, that he was arrested, and that he was going to be cuffed. If the individual puts up a fight, then you use force, but you don't even use the pepper spray then. There's different ways, especially when you have other officers willing to help, that you arrest an individual by grabbing his arms and putting them behind his back. And you try never to make an arrest alone. And in that situation where there was a party, the situation you're referring to, I believe he had other officers ready to assist. Pepper spray, if done by another individual against a person in public, would come under aggravated assault, not simple assault. That's how painful, excruciatingly painful it is. And subsequently, this officer is going to find it very hard to prove what he did was correct.
Well, let's talk about the officers that have a very hard time proving that what they're doing is correct. For example, in your case, you are the sole person, the sole police officer willing to stand in uniform to protest in this Occupy movement. And I wrote an article for the Huffington Post called The Thinnest Blue Line. And in that article, I pointed out that no other police officer, to my knowledge, has stepped forward to support you or to say, there are situations where we are going beyond the pale, and we're doing it because we want to keep our own paycheck, because we have to go along with it, or we're going to be excoriated. What in the world is the logic that any policeman can have listening to this program who will not support you in what you're doing that is right?
Jerry, I wish I had the answer to that. The logic in not supporting me escapes me. I don't see the logic, and that's one thing about my activities here that has really confounded me, and that is the lack of any support. I have nobody telling me that, hey, I'm willing to stand with you, I have my old uniform, and I want to support you. Not one single person. And I really thought I'd have a group of individuals willing to support me like that. But so far, and this has been 7 months now, I've been doing this, and not one single officer has stepped up. But that's okay, because I have a lot of occupiers that are always willing to stand with me, and that's very important.
What's interesting is that other people wore uniforms, and I'm talking about people in the military. I'm a former Navy veteran myself. I would have no problem standing out there in a uniform, exercising my right of free speech, my right to assemble. And there are quite a few Marines, Navy men, soldiers who are doing that right now. And yet, the police don't have that kind of backbone, that kind of assurance, or that kind of feeling of safety that they're able to do that. That has got to be frustrating for anybody who has a high ethical standard.
I think, boy, you use a strong word there, Jerry, when they say they don't have the backbone. I don't know if I would classify it as that, but there's certain reasons I guess every officer has, and the best thing I could say would be to ask the individual officers as to why they don't want to commit themselves to this. That's the only answer I can give you.
Yep. And I admit, it's strong to say they don't have backbone, because these are people that in an ordinary day meet more challenges than the citizens do. So where they show the backbone, when they're doing the right thing in the right way, I admire that, and that's what has kept me in the fold of appreciating the police. But like any other citizen, when I see police acting unlawfully or illegally, that affects my appreciation for all of them.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what is the killer about this whole incident of the police being videotaped, beating the demonstrators and macing them, pepper spraying them, is that it totally loses community support. And for the police to be effective, they have to have community support. You're not going to have an effective strategy, effective tactics in ridding areas of crime and life issues if you don't have the community behind you. And every day these videotapes are going out, and every day they lose support of the community. Every day people are watching that saying, I can't believe it, that's disgusting, that's a disgrace, and these people are no longer supporting the police departments.
Well, that's going to change over time, and I do believe that there are members of the police force who might be listening to this who will acknowledge you and the work that you're doing, and maybe at some point in time, enough of them will come out to be able to say, at least to one another, that there's something wrong about this and we need to change it. Now, you've got something possibly exciting happening in your life, and that's a desire to put together a very special project, which frankly is, in my mind, is to put wheels under your thoughts, wheels under your protests, and get you out to parts of the occupied world that ordinarily don't have a chance to meet a hero like you. Now, you have in mind something about putting together a van or a truck to be able to go around and bring you to, and your conversation to local Occupy groups. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, Jerry. I've been told by various Occupy organizations that I'm capable of being much more effective if I travel around. Yes, Philadelphia knows me, New York City knows me, but Des Moines, Iowa, Charlotte, North Carolina, Kalamazoo, Michigan, these are places, and even further west, I'm talking about going all the way out, these are places that have no knowledge of me. And I'm told I'm somewhat of a magnet in that mainstream America, they will pay attention, they will at least listen to what I have to say. Whether they agree is still up in the air, but at least they will listen. And that's half the battle, getting them to listen. Because what I want to ask them to do is to watch the documentary Inside Job. It's a documentary about the 2008 financial collapse. And every person that I have asked to watch this, that have watched it, are totally sold on the fact that we have to have major changes in the way campaigns are run, that we have to take money out of politics, and that the whole banking industry needs to be overhauled.
Well, if I remember right, that film was actually bankrolled by people in your own hometown of Philadelphia. Who were the people that put that together?
That was co-produced by Jeffrey Lurie and his wife, Christina Lurie. Jeffrey Lurie is the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, and while I was in Philadelphia during my career, it was well known that Jeffrey and Christina were very strong, civic-minded people and donated to many helpful charities and organizations in Philadelphia.
I wonder how many people that belong to their 1% category could lay claim to being that conscientious and responsible a citizen.
Oh, they're definitely different. They're a different breed, because when I was watching the credits at the end of the movie and I saw who produced it, even my eyes popped out, because I know they were big on civic duty in Philadelphia, but to produce a documentary that is so damning of the 1%, that even shocked me. So more credit to them.
You know, it takes brave people from any part of the strata to step out in front of a subject which is not going to be popularly heard. It's not going to be received well. For example, no one wants to think that the police aren't paragons of virtue and justice. No one wants to believe that businesses will actually steal from us. No one wants to believe that bankers will purposely defraud us. And yet, that happens. And it takes brave people to step out and say, enough is enough. Now, you're an example of that as someone who is going to be able to use your force of character and your background to be able to draw attention to certain things and make it more noticeable and more difficult to ignore. A little bit like the civil rights marches, when whites of stature stepped out in front and worked with these people. It could no longer, when I say these people, I'm talking about my fellow citizens, but they were willing to step out in front of an unpopular cause, at least unpopular for the general population, and actually make a stand. Now, I'd like to talk about one area that officers could make a stand at, and that's evictions. Now, you know and I know that evictions are legal, and I'll use that word in quotes, and that sometimes police action is involved with dispossessing people of their own homes. Now, didn't you have an opportunity to be involved in that in Philadelphia?
Yes, I did, Jerry. It was just about a week ago, and it was very interesting. I was asked by a leader of the Kensington Welfare Rights Union if I could protest with them in front of an elderly woman's house. She was to be evicted at 9 a.m. that Monday morning. And when these eviction notices are sent out, given the time and date, they are held to. The city comes out with a truck, they take all the possessions out, they board up the windows, and they always stick to that time and date. Now, what happened is I was there with this organization, consists of about 10 people. We held signs, "Don't evict Miss Franny," and here comes the city truck. City truck parked across the street, 9 a.m. The driver then went on his telephone and talked for quite a while. We do not know what he said, but the leader of that Kensington Welfare Rights Union, after he drove away, the guy in the truck, she pointed to me and said, "You are the reason that they did not evict Miss Franny today." Because one thing, they did not want the publicity, and two, they know that I was already willing to be arrested due to my previous arrest in New York City.
You know, what's also compelling about your story is that it carries this theme of illegitimate use of law and force, and the ability that our society has to put people in prison. The only ones escaping prison, of course, being bankers and Wall Street kind of people. But enough on that theme. You know what I mean by that. But let's talk about the fact that one of the beneficiaries of all these arrests, like the stop and frisk and arrests that are made if something comes about from that, is that there is such a thing as for-profit prisons. Now, here's where the police department serves as a feeder system for commercial prisons that are there to make a profit on the pains of these people that are put in prison. What is your sense of that?
My sense on that is truth is stranger than fiction. During my career, we didn't have that, and I never, ever thought I would live to see the day where you had prisons for profit. That totally makes law enforcement a farce when you're arresting people and sending them to prison just to make sure that you fulfill your contract obligation of making sure the prison is 96% full for these prison contractors. That is unbelievable that anything like that could be set up in this country.
Well, I hope there are people listening to this that can do something about it. I do know that you've got allies in media, certainly on a modest scale. Myself, you've got the Occupy Wall Street Journal that I believe has put out a new magazine. In fact, they're introducing a second issue of what they call Metro Occupy here in New York City. It's going to have your face on the cover and an article that goes along with it. You, standing, of course, in full uniform, will be there to hand out copies of this magazine, this piece. Tell me about how that came about.
Well, I had a photographer and a writer, Jim Lafferty, approached me, and he asked me if I would be willing to be photographed for the cover of this newspaper called the Metro Occupy. And I was glad to, and I'm going to help them distribute this on Thursday at Penn Central, and hopefully we'll have 10,000 copies. Of course, there's many other occupiers handing them out, but hopefully this will raise some eyebrows as to what's going on here in New York City.
Well, talk about coverage. You also, when you're here in town, hang out at the Yippee Cafe on 9 Bleecker Street. What are you doing hanging around with those riffraff?
Riffraff, I like that. Jerry, 9 Bleecker Street, the Yippee Cafe, is trying to become somewhat of a hub for the Occupy movement. And my first time there, I was invited there by a manager, John Murdoch, and I went. He asked me to speak, and I went there to speak. And from that night on, I've been hooked on the Yippee Cafe. The reason is I just loved the people. The people there make that a place where you can. They have an open mic night every Wednesday, 9 o'clock, and you can get up there and speak about anything you want. Everybody's respected. Whatever your viewpoint is, whatever you're doing, whether it's comedy, poetry, whether you're talking about some serious issues, everybody is respected, and they let them talk until they're finished. Nobody's jeered or booed. And what I like about the people, and when I say open-minded, that does not mean anything goes. Open-minded is they take in all sources of information, even from a side they're not initially inclined to want to believe, but they take it all in, and they use logic, they use reason and rationality to form their opinions. And subsequently, I felt really at home with these people. They're very free. They don't judge people, let's say, for gay marriage. The thing is, oh, well, if you have gay marriage, it's going to destroy straight marriage or traditional marriage. Well, these people would look at it like, well, how? You telling me a gay couple is going to stop straight people from getting married? Is a gay marriage going to make straight people all of a sudden get divorced? No, that's absurd. Subsequently, they evaluate beliefs like this, and they come to rational logic conclusions. And that's one of the main reasons I like hanging at the Yippee Cafe. Well,
I think we should make a blanket invitation to all the policemen in New York City to attend their Wednesday evening.
Oh, I will make that now to all NYPD officers. You are welcome down to the Yippee Cafe Wednesday evening, 9 o'clock.
I have a feeling you're going to be occupying that for-profit prison if you keep that up, Ray. Well, I want you to know that, once again, 15 minutes is never enough, and of course we've gone beyond that. So I'd like to complete this section with you by inviting people to reach out to you. You're on Facebook as Captain Ray Lewis, is that correct?
Yes, and also my profile page is Ray Occupy Lewis.
Ray Occupy Lewis. And if people want to write you, they can reach you at 218-RAY, R-A-Y, Lewis, L-E-W-I-S, @gmail.com.
Yes, and like you said, I do have 2 Facebook pages, the Ray Occupy Lewis, and also the one you said, Jerry, Captain Ray Lewis.
Great. Why don't you leave us with one last thought about why it's important for people in positions of power and authority to pay attention to Occupy Wall Street? Because
they set the example, Jerry. Every officer is influenced by the example set by their superior. And if they set the example of being interested in what's going on and also the way they interact with the occupiers, then you won't have these problems with the blue shirts and the occupiers, because they will follow the lead of the leaders of the white shirts.
Can't be said better than that. This is Jerry Ashton with 15 Minutes of Fact here on WGRNradio.com. Wishing all of you well, and I'll see you at the Yippee Cafe on Wednesday evening. Bye now.